Hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of Real Talk and ELT. My dog is settling herself in, so when they nest, they got to make everything so comfortable and they just kind of like dig all the blankets up. That's what's happening behind me, so I apologize for that noise. But today we're going to talk about, are you actually teaching the way that you think you are? Because my dog right now thinks that she's making the perfect bed, but really she's not moving anything around. It's it she does all of the work and then the bed looks the same as it did before she started trying to make it comfortable for herself. So I don't know. Is that you in the classroom? Here we go. That was a nice little segue. Okay. So sometimes people think like, oh, my teaching is very learner centered, very student centered. I do task based lessons. Or no, the students are definitely critically thinking and noticing these pieces of language. My question to you, I'm just going to throw it out there. When was the last time you checked? It's just because I have to check on myself. Because here's what I actually happened to me. I actually started checking, recorded a lesson, listened to it back, did the timing out, reviewed what the students were doing versus what I was saying, what was happening in the classroom. And then sometimes people can very much reach that uncomfortable truth is that there is a gap between what I think I'm doing and what is actually happening. This is not about being a good or bad teacher. This is not about being a professional or not a professional. This is just about being accurate in your assessment of yourself. Because we have to assess ourselves. Like, am I doing what I think I'm doing? Especially if you're promoting your services. If you say you are one thing and then students get into the classroom and it's clearly not that thing, that's a problem because there's this gap between what you say and what you do. So I've been there. I will own it. 100% I will own it that I've been, or I thought I was, running task-based lessons. Oh, this is super task-based. No, I just totally clocked myself covering grammar for a chunk of time because the students were like not getting it, and so I had to go over it because they couldn't do the task unless they could do it, you know what I mean? So then I was like, oh, this is actually not task-based at all because I'm not focused on the task, I'm focused on their language. Cool. Reality check for Kelly. I also am a huge proponent of learner autonomy, but then I started reflecting on some of the things that were happening in my class, and I was like, oh, I'm making all the decisions. Like, they're just being passive the whole time. Another reality check for Kelly. Okay. And I used to think, well, no, I give them reflective practice. I let students reflect on it. I reflect on it. Like, this is very, it's very open to reflection in the space that I create. Well, actually, I never really gave students a good enough space to reflect on things or the actual tools on how they should be doing that because some people are just not really good at reflection, especially about learning. I don't think, reflecting on like, is this working for me or did something work and I wish we would do more of it? Or, when do you tend to see yourself being more accurate? It didn't really do that. And then some people just are not, they're like, I feel like I'm making progress. It's like, in what way? And then they can't expand on that at all. So if you want a reality check, it hurts a little. It's a little bruise to the ego, but here are some ways that you can do it without spiraling into self-doubt, thinking you're the worst person in the world, because you're not. You're just trying to get better. So one easiest way to do it, record and review and look at it like a coach, not a critic. You're not critiquing yourself. You're trying to coach yourself out of it because maybe you don't have a person that can watch it. Maybe you don't have a peer that you trust. Maybe you have a coordinator that is horribly underprepared and just maybe doesn't know what he or she is doing, or that they just don't have the time and they don't really care that much about the company. They're just focused on their stuff. There's a lot of different scenarios. So here, do it yourself. Record and review. Pick a lesson, watch it back, record it first, watch it back, and ask this question. Is this aligned with what I believe about teaching? I think, for example, and if you haven't seen some of my videos about people figuring out what their teaching style is, what their teaching philosophy is, go back and maybe watch those or Google something so you can kind of, work through that whole thing in your brain. But you got to figure out, I believe that learning happens this way in the classroom. So I believe that my classroom should be more task-based or more communicative, or should be freer and based on, the person's like dog me type of style, whatever. I don't care. What do you think is the best way for students to learn? That should be reflected in every single lesson that you give. That's your baseline. So then if you're doing something completely different, why are you doing it that way? Do you actually say something like, I believe this, but in reality I do that? Because that's a little dissonance there, and your students are going to feel it. You're going to feel it. So yeah, figure that out first. 2, if you can, I'm not sure if everybody has this opportunity, get an outside eye. So ask a trusted peer to observe you, give you feedback on it, and tell them what you're looking for. Because people hyper-focus, I know that I do, when I observe, I tend to hyper-focus on one thing or another, depending on what the scenario is. So I do a lot of observations. A lot. I mean, I can't even tell you how many hours of observation I've done in my career at this point. It's a lot. And if somebody just tells me, watch my lesson and tell me what you think, it's just so broad for me. So I'm just usually going to go to kind of like the things that I think are core and basic and that help students regardless of level, nationality, you know what I mean, like educational background. So I just kind of go to those core basics that I rely on. But if you want feedback from peers, I strongly recommend that you ask for very specific feedback. What do you want the person to look at? Do you want them to look at your tone, your classroom management, student engagement, task clarity, materials? But don't just ask people like, oh, was it good? Most people are just not rude. They're gonna be like, yeah, it was fine. Because here's the thing. When I watch lessons, observing lessons, there are positives and negatives in every single lesson. Positives and negatives. I can find good things in even the worst of the worst lessons. Fact. I've trained my eye for it. So I can watch a total trash lesson. I can still find good things that happen in it. It can be a total disaster. Main aim not achieved, like just bad. All of the things that you're supposed to do, just doing the 180 opposite of it. I can still find a good thing about that. That's the thing. Like I might struggle, but I can still find a good thing about it. So asking somebody, was it good? Yeah, they're just going to highlight the things that they thought were positive, but that's not going to be super beneficial for you at all. All right. So record yourself, ask a friend if you have the opportunity, but ask with intention and say, hey, I need you to look at X, Y, and Z. And the third one, I have my notes here, so map your actual choices. So write it down. Writing things down is it's very therapeutic to write it down. Just write it down and burn it afterwards. No, but it makes it real. So when you get When you're doing courses and things like that, and you get reports, it's like, ugh, like I knew that I messed this up, but then it's written down. It makes it real. It hurts a little bit because it's real. But then if it's real, usually people take actionable steps to change it. So write it down. How often do you ask open questions? If you think that, communication is top priority for you, then open questions should be right there on your list, right? How much prep do you do versus your students? If you're trying to make students more and more autonomous, trying to get those self-study habits going and having them bring things to class and having them do stuff because they should be autonomous learners, then you should be asking that question. How much prep do you do and how much prep do your students do? Who's doing the cognitive heavy lifting in the lesson? This is a great question to ask. If you are digesting all of the information and you're making let me be careful here. You are trying to facilitate the process. The way that I see teachers, to be honest, English teachers, I'm just talking about, that's the only teaching I've done, so that's the only thing I can comment on. The way that I say English teachers and a way that I actually explain it to a lot of my clients and students is that anybody can learn a language. One fact, anybody can learn a language. Doesn't matter your age, it doesn't matter where you're from, anybody can learn English. That's a possibility. To what fluency and proficiency level, that's different, but anybody can learn it because everybody has the possibility of learning, because we know that everybody's brain, even from birth to death, you can learn new things. That is a possibility. Unless you have some horrible, horrendous disease, and then you're the exception, and I feel so bad for you. But everybody can learn a language. So if everybody can learn a language, then everybody should be able to process things themselves so that they can create short-term memories, long-term memories, and it becomes, something that's stuck in their brain, even after their brain does that self-cleaning thing there's a couple of stages in your life where it just kind of rips out all of the old material, the old connections that it deems unnecessary, right? So everybody can learn, everybody can make memories, and to do so, people actually have to think. They have to focus on something. They have to think. They have to make their connections in their brains. You cannot do that for them. Now, if your lessons are just full of you spoon feeding, I think the mailman is in the neighborhood because the dogs are going crazy. If you're spoon feeding all of the information to your students and they're not really doing any cognitive processing, critical thinking, they're not noticing things, that is a problem. Because one, they're not going to feel as much progress. They're going to get frustrated. Like, why can't I remember this stuff? We talked about it last. Because unfortunately, you as the teacher, you're not creating an environment or a lesson or an activity or a structure, whatever you want to call it, that's forcing them to do the cognitive processing. Cognitive load is all on me to digest. We have to facilitate. Sure, we have to facilitate. So we've got to give them examples. We have to make it contextualized. We have to do activities that help scaffold this whole learning process for them. We have to check to make sure that they have a clear understanding of things. So we have got a lot of responsibility in this process, but the actual learning doesn't happen with us. The actual learning happens with them. And all we're doing as teachers is we're guiding them to proficiency, fluency, accuracy quicker than if they were doing it themselves. Because you can learn a language by yourself. I did it. Because I came to Brazil, I never had a Portuguese class. There was a couple, I can't say never. I sat in 2 classes and it was like one was a song and another one was spelling something. And I never had anything else after that, and I don't even remember what they. I was the spelling was the CH versus the X or whatever. Anywho, I never had a course. I never did anything. I never had a teacher. I never had Portuguese. And I learned the language, more or less. Not great, intermediate at most. Didn't even really work at it that much. It was just something that happened because I lived here and I was forced to observe people interacting, and then I would try and repeat it like a parrot and say. So I learned the language without a teacher. I got to an intermediate level probably within like 7 or 8 years of like living here. The first 2 years I didn't interact with anyone. It was like me, my husband, my dogs. That was it. Not interested. It was like the basics, like, hey, how's it going? Like, no. Beyond that, I wasn't interested in interacting too much. And then I got my freedom, so I started driving around a little bit. Got my license, like the official Brazilian one, like I've had my license since I was like 15 or whatever, but like, and then so then I started going around and I had to interact with people without having my husband there, to help me out with everything. And then I started learning. So it probably took me a good like 5 years to get to an intermediate, 5 or 6 years to get to an intermediate level. Here's the thing about it. I didn't take a class. Like nobody coached me. My husband barely speaks in Portuguese to me. It's all English. So can you learn without an English teacher? Absolutely. Anybody can do it. I'm not an anomaly. Like people do this all the time. Every day people are learning new languages without teachers. But what teachers do is they make the process a little bit faster. Because we facilitate the process. We know what you probably need to know. We help you along the way. We give you tips and tricks, and we get you to your goal a little bit faster. So if you're not getting people to the goal faster because they're not doing any of the cognitive heavy lifting, that's a problem. That's a problem. So let me just wrap this up because I've been chatting for a bit about this. So if you kind of aren't sure if you're actually doing what you say you're doing, or if maybe students kind of ghost you if you're a private teacher, that's a pretty good indication that you've sold them something, and what you sold them is not what's happening in class. So I would just look clearly at, let me just double check that I didn't mix any of my little points here. Yeah. Look clearly at what you want to do, who you think you are, what do you believe about teaching, watch yourself, have a friend watch you, and then map out some of the choices, map out some of the things that are essential for what you believe language learning looks like. Language learning looks different for many people, and it's based on your experience. So sure. Are there some principles along the way that like are just good principles and like everybody should kind of is like, we have a consensus about this? Yeah, sure. But the way that things are developed and delivered, not much of a consensus as of yet, unless we make some more discoveries. So if you're just kind of coasting on those good instincts and doing, kind of the minimum, and you feel like, my experience is fine, but then you're kind of like, I'm not sure, something feels off. Might be time to check that footage, go back, roll the tape back, and see what's actually going on. That's the best advice I can give you. If you don't think that your teaching is aligning with what you're saying. Good luck with that. Let me know how it goes, and I'll see you later.